Hey, everybody. Welcome to Talking Hockey Sense. I'm Chris Peters. It's episode 123 of the podcast, and we are here to recap the 2024 NHL Draft. I was in Las Vegas. We are going to bring a guest in just a little bit. We'll talk a little bit more about the NHL Draft, but obviously, what an event it was at the Sphere. Really excited that I was able to be there for it, to see it all unfold. And obviously, we saw Macklin Celebrini go number one, and we'll get into all of that today. Before we get in today's episode, I do want to remind you, if you have not yet, go check out what we had for you at FloHockey.tv. We've got NHL draft grades. We've got a way too early top 10 for 2025. We've got, the pick-by-pick analysis from the first round and a ton of player interviews from the draft floor as well. So lots to get to and lots for you to catch up on if you want to get caught up with the NHL draft. But it was a lot of fun to be there, and certainly we're going to talk a lot more about it. And I'm really excited today we're going to have a guest on the podcast. It's been a while since he's been on the show, but if the times that he's been on before, it's been electric. So I'm really excited to bring on to today's episode Matt Moran. He's a good friend of mine, a sparring partner at times, but usually very friendly. No blood is spewed at that. But also, for many years was a scout at the USHL and OHL levels, was with a number of teams, has a Memorial Cup ring with the Windsor Spitfires. That's pretty good. And also, you've been in these rooms, you've been in these discussions, and maybe it hasn't been at the NHL level, but I think it actually does help to have your insight. So Matt Moran, welcome back to Talking Hockey Sense. We missed you, bud.
Good to be back, Chris. Thanks for having me. Welcome back from Vegas.
Yeah, I'm still recovering. I didn't have too much fun. I was a lot of work, but sleep was optional for most of that trip. So you know how that goes as well as anybody.
You look great in that white jacket on Friday night.
Thank you. Yeah, I got a lot of compliments on the white jacket. If you didn't see the white jacket, you should find some pictures of the white jacket. It was solid. It was very Vegas. I felt like that was a very Vegas kind of thing.
Very, very cousin Eddie.
Yeah, thank you very much. I appreciate that, cousin Eddie. All right. Well, I hope that wasn't the reaction from everybody else. But so let's get into it. Let's talk NHL draft. You were watching from afar. I was on the ground, and we were obviously going back and forth throughout the draft as well. As many of my guests on this podcast are, there's usually a G chat or a Facebook Messenger or a WhatsApp chat going simultaneously with all these things. And we're having these conversations. I was like, hey, let's get this on the podcast. Let's get this on the pod. So we're going to start with the NHL draft reaction and starting at number one. Obviously everybody knew where that was going to go. Macklin Celebrini to San Jose. I'm going to get into them a little bit more in depth earlier because I think beyond Macklin Celebrini, they had a tremendous draft. But, Matt, I remember the first time I wrote about Macklin Celebrini was right when he signed his tender with the Chicago Steel. And I remember you telling me right away, this guy is different. This guy is special. You had seen him a bit with the Shattuck team. I mean, what do you remember from them and what you've seen since then?
Yeah, he was awesome at Shattuck and had a good friend. His son played with him there, who was also drafted this week by Detroit in the 5th round, John Whipple. Congrats to him by the Red Wings, like I said. And, watching Mac, they were there at 14 years old. He was just exceptional from the start. Never the biggest guy. Compete was off the charts. He was just faster than everybody, more skilled, not afraid to do anything. And that translated as he took the next jump to the USHL. And then in college as a 17-year-old, I think he just turned 18, like 2 weeks before the draft, if he has even turned it. So he's the youngest player to ever win the Hobey Baker. And you rarely see someone with that skill set who also competes as hard as he does. I don't know if he's been – I don't know if he's been billed as generational as a McDavid or someone like that, but he certainly has an elite level skill, but he competes, harder than anybody. And it's been cool to watch him, kind of excel at every step of the way. And I don't know if he's going to go back to school or not, but certainly ready for the NHL in my opinion.
Yeah. And, I'm pretty sure that this'll, we'll be hearing about a contract in the not so distant future. San Jose's been making moves to try to insulate next year's roster. It's still not going to be very good, but I think it'll be better than it was. And to have Celebrini, Will Smith at the same time, I think that we'll eventually see Mac there. His parents do live somewhat about 40 minutes away from the arena.
Yep.
So that's, I don't think he's going to be living at home. I think that there's other plans for him. Because that's a bit of a commute. You don't want to have to drive into the rink that far, but I think that it's going to be a great thing for them, and obviously a historic moment for the San Jose Sharks, because I do think that he's a foundational piece for them. And it was no surprise. It was great to see Jumbo Joe out there announcing the pick as well. You get Big Joe Thornton out there, and I believe that
Did you see what Mike Greer said about him and his role after the draft?
I did, and it's all about vibes with Jumbo. Yeah, he's just Jumbo there to bring the vibes. Yeah, so I love that. So we love that about Jumbo Joe, and certainly he brought the vibes right away. He was obviously excited to see Macklin Celebrini, and I wonder too if Macklin might be a housemate with Joe Thornton or somebody, because get the vibes on and off the ice.
All time.
The other. I do also want to touch on Chicago picking number 2. Obviously, there's been a ton of debate leading up to the draft about, should it be Ivan Demidov? Should it be Artem Levshunov? There were reports that Chicago even tried to get the number 4 overall pick to try to jump the line, knowing that Montreal was very keen to draft Ivan Demidov, so that, I think it was an unprotected first round from next year. And Columbus said no thank you, and I think that was actually the right call for them, because they desperately wanted Caden Lindstrom. And you don't know, what if Chicago, I don't think this would happen, but what if they went on a bit of a run next year, and all of a sudden that pick is not a lottery pick, or not a very high pick, and you just gave up the 4th for a lottery ticket essentially. But either way, they pick Artem Levshunov, and I think there are some Blackhawks fans that are upset by that. I think there are some that are indifferent to it. I don't think anybody, the Blackhawks the whole time. I've been saying it on the podcast for weeks that I thought that was the direction it was going to go. You talk around the scouting community, that's the direction that it seemed like it was going to go. And here you are, you get a top tier defenseman. I have no issue with that. Chicago also ended up having 3 first round draft picks, also selecting Sasha Boisvert and then trading up to get Merrick Vanacker, which I do think was a reach in the last pick. But at the same time, as you know, Maddie, from being in draft boards, if there's a guy that you like and you're not 100% sure he's going to be there with your next pick, sometimes it behooves you to trade up and go get your guy. But I'm going to blow past that, and I want to get your reaction. So Beckett Sennecke goes 3rd overall to the Anaheim Ducks, and loved his reaction to going 3rd overall. There was a lot of rumors in the weeks prior that was a potential destination for Sennecke, who is on the rise. He was number 11 on my list. But he ends up going number 3. He jumps Demidov. He jumps Tij Ginla. Jumps Caden Lindstrom even. And just your thoughts on not just that, but also where the Ducks are as a prospect pool. They're pretty darn loaded right now.
Yeah, that one was definitely a surprise. I think I saw a couple people right before the draft, in the media, maybe tweet out that name was heating up to Anaheim. I think Verbeek usually keeps stuff pretty close to the vest. It's hard to read, and people could say, hey, the draft probably starts at 3 or at 4. Once he picks, it kind of clears the way on people's boards. The reaction was amazing, like you said. You could tell he didn't know it was coming, which is pretty cool. And I think, when the draft goes away in person, you're going to miss some of that authenticity and seeing these young kids, realize in real time that they just got drafted in the NHL, which is pretty cool. But their prospect pool is growing, like you said, and they definitely have a type. They took Leo Carlson last year, big, strong, 2-way guy. You don't believe how big he is until you see him play in person. And Beckett Sennecke is also a big 2-way, long. He's a winger, 6'2", 6'3", can skate. Kind of came on late in Oshawa. I think everybody thought they were going to go defense just because they're light there. They traded Drysdale to Philly, in the Cutter Gauthier trade. And so, hey, we got to reload a little bit on the back end perhaps. But for them, he was best player available. Good on him.
Yeah. And I think that was, I had done my final mock draft, and I'm still kicking myself to this day. I have the text receipts to prove that I was try and debate with people. Should I put Sennecke at number 3? I think it could happen. And then I chickened out because I don't think I had enough sleep to have the confidence. I was like, am I just dreaming? Did any of this really happen? And so instead of going 5 for 5 at the top, I went 4 for 5 at the top on the mock draft. But the Sennecke pick, yeah. So, I mean, Salayev was the other guy that I do think there was some serious debate about between those two players. You mentioned that they have some good defensemen in their system, but then they have really this need for that big, heavy shutdown guy. And I thought that could win the day. But I think if we look at the way that Pat Verbeek has drafted over the last couple of years, that's not. And Martin Madden is their director of scouting, who's been with the Ducks for predates Pat Verbeek and is really one of the real talented scouts in the business. They haven't necessarily gone the conventional way or the consensus way. And they go for their guy, and that was Beckett Sennecke. And then in the end, I don't begrudge them for that pick at all.
Their last handful of picks too. I mean, they don't get a lot of love in the scouting or prospect community just because they're out west, second team in a market. They're on late.
Yeah.
If you look at their last handful of high picks, it's Zellweger, McTavish, Minchikov, Leo Carlson, and this guy. It's going to be hard to find a staff that's hit it like that consistently at the top in the last handful of years. So good on them.
Yeah, it helps to be able to pick high, but you have to you can still get those wrong, and they're not. It doesn't seem like they're doing that. And they went and got Cutter Gauthier, who's another top 5 pick for Jamie Drysdale. So taking advantage of things there. I'm going to go, Kane Lindstrom to Columbus. That was kind of where we thought that was going to go the whole time. Just a note on that. He still is not cleared for contact. So he's at development camp, but is not cleared for contact due to the injuries that he had at the end of the last season. So patience if you are a Columbus Blue Jackets fan to see him in action. It's going to take some time. But now we move on to Ivan Demidov and the Montreal Canadiens. And they bring out Celine Dion, which I'm sure you absolutely loved. Who doesn't love Celine? She comes
Pretty
out,
sweet.
Announced. It was awesome. I mean, Ivan Demidov pick. I had an internet issue. I had to run up to the media room just as Montreal was on the clock, and so I missed my opportunity to be in the same room with the legend that is Celine Dion. So that was very, very upsetting to me in the end. But Montreal picks Ivan Demidov, and there was plenty of rumors swirling around. Would they go in a different direction? Were they really that serious about it? And in the end, they do what their fans most desperately wanted them to do, which they have not done in recent drafts. I think back to the Jesperi Kotkaniemi pick where the woman was just like, had her hands on her face, was like, oh, what happened? And she was right. Just wanted to throw that out there. She was right. And Brady Tkachuk probably would have been the better pick there. But they don't pick Shane Wright. They don't pick I'm trying to think of some of the other ones
last year for
Mitchkov, exactly, for Reinbacher. So they go and they get Demidov, who he was number 3 on my list. I think he's an exceptional talent. I do think that the hype has gotten a little out of control. Maddie, I don't know how much MHL hockey you're watching these days, but the thing is that league is it really is not good. I just want to, so his production there is very impressive. The league itself is not very strong. It doesn't tell us, because he broke Nikita Kucherov's record for points in a season and it was the MVP. It doesn't tell us that he is going to be an elite level scorer. I think based on the skill, based on what I've seen, he is. But now let's take a look at this. So you've got Montreal. You got Juraj Slafkovsky on one wing. You're going to have Ivan Demidov potentially on the other wing. You've got Nick Suzuki. You've got Cole Caulfield. Hopefully Kirby Dach is healthy. They've got a young core. I still think there's a lot of building to be done. I like what their blue line looks like long term. I still think the jury's out on Reinbacher. I think he's going to be a good player, but I don't think that whether it's him versus Mitchkov, now that they have Demidov, I think those fans will probably get off their scouting staff's back just a little bit. But I mean, just based on what about their prospect pool, how do we feel about the Habs long term? Do we see a path forward to them to being a Stanley Cup contending team here in the next 4 to 5 years?
Yeah, they definitely have the young pieces coming into place. Owen Beck's really strong. He had a really good draft plus 1 year in junior. He played a game. Misar, who they took in the first round last year, I know you were really high on. They like him as well. My guy Lane Hudson turned pro, after another great year at BU. So they have the pieces. They've had health issues, like you said, with Kirby Doc. Suzuki's great. They just have a lot of young players. They've picked a lot. Like if you scroll through, old drafts, they've had 7+ picks, 8+ picks in the last handful of drafts. You can only have so many contracts, and you wonder if they would be better off using some of these, high picks that people seem to trade away now more freely than ever for roster players or impact players. St. Louis is going to get some runway to do it there. They've got the new, kind of two-headed structure in the front office with Jeff Gordon and Ken Hughes that are kind of turning things around, and it's just about staying on pace. But it's Eastern Conference is, as bad as it was last year, kind of at the bottom. It's pretty competitive in that last, 3 or 4 spots for the last two to three playoff spots. And I don't know if they're ready to make that jump yet. I think some teams got worse this week in free agency that they could maybe leapfrog, but they've got a good young core, and that's not a team that's too far removed from playing for the Stanley Cup during COVID either.
Yeah. So I mean, I think there's certainly a lot of pieces in place for the future. There's going to have to be work done in free agency and trades to insulate some of those guys. I think that they do need to get bigger as a group. I think that's a pretty small roster, and Demidov does not help them get bigger. He is a strong player, but he may not be here at least for another year. So that'll be interesting to watch. But I think Montreal has been in this kind of weird place where their best opportunity getting the first overall pick was probably the weakest draft that we've had. So it's also about when you're bad sometimes is helpful. But to now have a player like Demidov, where I think a lot of their fans probably feel like, hey, we got one of a guy that could potentially have gone number 1 in other drafts.
I mean, Slafkovsky did score 50 points last year, right? He's coming along.
And that's the thing. Right. I don't mean to slight Uri Slafkovsky. That's a good point, Maddie, because he is playing really well. And I think that they're at this point proven fairly right. And he just signed a big ticket. So you have cost certainty with him for the next 8 years. So, I think that's
scored 20 goals as a 19-year-old.
Yeah, it's really impressive. And I just, I think but it's not like they got Macklin Celebrini, right? It's not like they got the Connor Bedards and those. So that's the thing is like, those found, like, is Slafkovsky a foundational franchise building block? Yes, but not in the same way that a Celebrini or a Bedard would be. But either way, that's where the point comes. But I also wanted to go to me that Beckett Sennecke going third was not the biggest surprise for me. The biggest surprise for me was that Zeev Buium went 12th, that he was the 6th of the top 6 defensemen taken, and that the Philadelphia Flyers actually traded out of that spot. And the thing is, we'll get to Philly in a second, because I think that's a different topic. It's different than some of the other teams that drafted defensemen. I had Zeev Buium as the 3rd defenseman on my list behind Levshinov and Salayev. And Salayev is a 6'7" mobile defenseman. There just aren't very many guys like him that exist. Zeev Buium is a player that I think has a lot of potential. Like, we could look back on this draft and we could say that guy ended up being the best defenseman in the draft. I mean, it's very possible given his track record and what he showed. But, there are a couple of things that happened. And I have a piece on FloHockey.tv where I kind of reverse engineered the first round to explain why I think Zeev Buium fell the way that he did. And one of the reasons, and I want to put this to you as well, one of the reasons is that there were not one, but 2 smaller market Canadian teams. And when I say smaller market, I mean not Montreal, not Toronto, and not Vancouver. I think those 3 cities are still going to be fine and can get whoever they want. The other teams, I really do feel, are going to shy away from American players, and not just American college players, American players. We have seen this, Calgary, Ottawa selected Carter Yakimchuk, big right shot defenseman. Calgary selected Zane Parekh, 96 points in the OHL this year, right shot defenseman, highly offensive defenseman. Both of those players, to me, are decisively behind Zeev Buium in terms of that. That may not be true for their scouting staffs, But what did you make of that? And am I on the right track here with this some of these smaller market teams just simply aren't going to pick Canadians or Americans?
Yeah. Yeah, I thought that piece was awesome. By the way, I read that.
Oh, thank you.
When you tweeted it out, it was just a really cool way to unpack, hey, how this board fell, because everyone's board is so different, despite a lot of consensus in the public markets, right? In the public draft board, a lot of them look the same and feel the same. But when you talk to the people we talk to around the draft, you get a sense for hey, if this guy's available for Seattle, for example, the draft's going to get turned upside down because no one thinks they have this guy here. So anyway, I was surprised that it took that long for the D to start going. I think there was a lot of consensus early that there was a bunch of public boards that had a run on D, kind of maybe at 2 to 5. We're going to be all defensemen, right? You just never know. I love watching Zeev Buium. He got to play his draft year, which I think is an advantage in college. So he put up, 50 points as a true freshman coming out of the development team. He missed last year's draft by a couple months. Fabulous player. No more ink needs to be spilled on what he brings to the table. You touched on it earlier, small market Canadian teams. I can say with almost 100% certainty that's why Calgary made the selection they made in Zane Parekh, not to discount what he's capable of at all. I heard someone on the draft coverage call him an offenseman. He just takes it. He just takes it and goes. He's a really talented player, but he's truly one-dimensional. But there were some cool pieces about him. He's like, hey, I know that the way I play is different, and I'm going to try and make it work in the NHL. Calgary's been burned by Adam Fox, by Matthew Tkachuk, and others, where they just don't.
Johnny Gaudreau, Noah Hannafin,
left them kind of at the altar. And so if I'm Craig Conroy sitting there, kind of Calgary's in a weird place. They've got some older guys with unmovable deals and a pretty good young pool of players. They just traded Mangiapane, who scored a ton for them. Hey, I'm going to take the guy that I know that's going to come here and not going to screw around. And not to say that Zeev was going to do that or his camp was signaling that before the draft, but it's a risk you have to consider. And, they still took a good player, but I'm a big fan of Zeev, and, friend of the program, Judd Brackett, puts his hand on the table to, make a trade. They traded a third-round pick. The price to move up one spot was a third-round pick, to go and get a player that he thought was, a game changer. And, the steal of the first round, if it's hard to call the 12th overall pick in the draft a steal, but they got a pretty good one. And I'll be interested to see if he goes back to college. His brother signed, after they won the national championship. I don't know what else he has left to accomplish. Minnesota could desperately use a player like him. They don't have that QB1, back there running a power play, and that team's got to get going. And he could be, kind of instant offense right out of the gate. I thought it was an awesome pick. Good for them.
Yeah, I thought it was a great pick too, and I think there is going to be some significant debate on what the best path forward is for Zeev Buium. I think that there's no harm in going back, but I also think that there is some motivation. I think a lot, coming out of the combine, a lot of teams said, hey, there's a chance that he's going to be ready to come out, and so I think there are going to be some nervous moments for the University of Denver because he is. He's a very critical player. It's also going to be some nervous moments for Team USA because they would have their number one defenseman and a critical piece of their repeat bid. They have a lot of returning players. Their camp is coming up in a couple of weeks, and Buium is on the list. And we'll see if ultimately he ends up being there.
This is the last year on Minnesota's cap where they have to eat the huge charge for Parise and Suter, right? And so it becomes, I think it reduces by $7 million each next year. So they've got a lot more flexibility. So is it worth plugging him in now? Burn a year, who cares? He fits. He's probably better plug and play, I think, than you're going to get on the open market if they're ready to turn him pro. Right? They're going to be up it all year. Why not just get him ingratiated in there so they can start building around him going forward?
Yeah, and I think the other thing that's true of this whole situation with with Minnesota is that they have some D prospects that just haven't taken the step necessary to be NHL ready. And so, Carson Lambos isn't going to be coming in next year, like that, unless, barring some insane summer that he had, so there's really, that there is an opening, there's an opportunity. And I think all those are good points. So we'll see where that all ends up. I did want to talk a little bit about Philadelphia, because you're Philadelphia based. You've seen the reaction to Philadelphia Flyers fans. Now, there's one important thing to bring up, and I know this is going to be part of your conversation about this, but so they have Jamie Drysdale, they have Cam York, and they have Emil Andrea, who was the other one that they brought up. No disrespect to Emil Andrea. He's not in the same stratosphere as either of those other players. I like the player. I think he's a good prospect. He's not in the same category as those guys. But, the other thing is if they get a third round pick out of the deal, which I think is, nice to get an extra asset if you're not going to pick the player. And I was like, was that just because they didn't want the optics of passing on a top tier defenseman to take a second tier center? And I love Jet Luchenko. I wrote this in the piece. I think he's an outstanding prospect. He's a very good stylistic fit for Philadelphia. But if we're looking at the tiers of the drafts, right, and consensus versus the public, and I think this will be part of your conversation as well. The tiers between, I think Luchenko was in at least a tier below where I thought Buium was relative to this draft class. So, what are your thoughts from the Philadelphia move on the Buium situation there?
Yeah, like you said, I live here, have a bunch of friends on the team, root for them and their success. So you want to see them do well. You're invested in what they're doing there. Danny does a great job and has done a great job. They walked into a pretty tough situation. They're corporate owned, so they don't necessarily have an identity, one guy walking in there saying, we're going to get this right. And I think you've seen in the last handful of Stanley Cup winning teams how important an awesome owner is, right? An empowering owner to get out there and just go make shit happen, right? If you believe, I will believe in you. And these guys are owned by a cable company. Right. And so it's been a long time since, Mr. Snyder passed away. And so they've come in there with a job to do, and Keith Jones and him and Torts have done it, pretty well thus far. And you kind of said it there, hey, they've said, Danny said it. We have Cam York, who we're really high on, who quietly had a really, really good season after being called out by Torts, early on. I don't know if you're an NHL player, and he kind of clapped back, with his performance over the course of the year. Jamie Drysdale came in, was great, got hurt. He had surgery. He'll be ready to go. Emil Andrea, like you said, is a ways away. They also got Oliver Bonk last year in the end of the first round, who scored almost 70 points for London and was critical in their OHL championship, team this season. So they have that category checked, right? And I think that this, rolls into the debate, best player available versus team and prospect pool construction. And it was funny to watch and continue to watch. Philly's got a very passionate, fan base here. 0.00% of them watch hockey, and 100.0% of them think they know everything about it. And so, they watch them pass to take a center who no one's ever heard of down here before. They couldn't pick him out of a lineup if it was in their living room. And it was meltdown. Not only did we traded away one spot to get this guy, blah, 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 chaos. Fire Danny Briere. It's the same old stuff. No one knows what they're doing, right? They actually traded that third round pick away already. I forget what they did with it at the draft, but they moved it. And he's been very publicly facing, saying, look, we think the 25 draft is better and deeper, and they have 6 picks in the first 2 rounds. They have three firsts and 3 seconds, right? And now we just talked about how much we both like Zeev Buium and how good of an NHL player we think he could be. And so, that presses the bet on their pick even more, just because he's always going to be held and compared against Zeev, even though they play different positions and have a different approach, to the game. Jet Luchenko was almost not eligible for this draft by like 3 weeks, I think. He's super young. I think he's like
he's young.
Birthday, right? And he brings an element to Philly that they lack. He can really scoot. And Philly is one of the slower teams in the NHL, and you saw that kind of down the stretch. They had almost a historic collapse to miss the playoffs on the last day after being almost a 95%, lock to make it, I think, starting in early March or late February. So you're adding a right shot center who can really push the pace on a team that's trying to get younger and faster. And that's Danny and Brent Flair's call to do that, right? Zeev Buium may be great in 4 or 5 years. He may be great next year. But it really sent the fan base here into a tizzy. I mean, it was a spiral, and it's funny to watch. And they're passionate and they care, but this poor kid coming in here to development camp has no chance, just because of who he's not, right?
Yeah.
And they read all the websites and they read all the models, and everyone glows about Zeev because he played in the World Junior and blah blah blah. I mean, Jet Luchenko could make Team Canada in the World Junior next year and light it up, and everyone's building a statue for Danny outside the arena already. Right.
It's possible though. Yeah. And I say again, like, none of this is to slight Jet Luchenko. He was 18th on my list, and after the combine, there was a ton of buzz. And I'm telling you right now, a lot of teams had Luchenko higher than 18th on their board. I think he would
from the combine were outstanding. Someone tweeted out his performance of all the off-ice stuff, which most people don't get to kind of dig into, and he was first or second in a bunch of notable categories, and everything else that he wasn't, he was like top 6 or 7. So just
lower body, lower body, he was outstanding. Like his vertical jumps were towards the top. Like I think he was second to EJ Emery, who's 6'4" and played football growing up, so like he's really, like, there's a lot of really impressive things with Luchenko, and I think there's also a good point there is, like, the consensus best player available, and I talked about this on last week's podcast. The consensus best player available is not how teams are building their list. They are building teams. They're building teams, and that is they need to find whoever fits into their dynamic. And the thing that I'll say, though, is I like Cam York a lot. I like Jamie Drysdale a lot. I even like Emil Andre a lot. I do think that Zeev Buium of that quartet of players, based on projection, and this is all projection, right? Based on projection, I think he's going to be the best of that group. And so you say,
and I think it comes down to belief of, hey, is what makes this guy special amongst his draft class peers portable to the NHL for a guy who's sub-size, quote unquote, relative to what it takes to win. I think there's been a lot of analytics done, and I heard about it on other podcasts. I haven't had a chance to double click into it as much as I would like to. A number one defenseman under 6'2" with a bunch of other mechanics behind it has like a minimal chance of leading a team through the playoffs to win a Stanley Cup.
Yeah.
Right. And if I forget all the ins and outs of it, and I'll get butchered for that, and I'll find it. But it was, hey, it came up in the context of Vancouver and Quinn Hughes, who just won the Norris Trophy. Right. But is that the kind of guy at his size and ability that's going to get you through 4 rounds of playoffs as a number one and win the Stanley Cup? You need that big, mean, kind of pound it guy. And Zeev is not that, and that's okay. But again, you could have just passed on the most impactful player of the bunch. For a young center who might be viewed as a reach. So,
yeah. Yep. And I'll say, like, the Matvei Michkov pick is going to be the defining pick of Danny Briere's GM tenure, but this one is going to be monitored for the rest of time. So enjoy that. It should be fun. I'm just going to buzz through a couple of other quick observations, and then we're going to get to the draft winners and losers here too. Tarek Parasak going to the Washington Capitals. You grew up a Capitals fan. That was, I think for a lot of people, probably the reach of the first round. I like Parasak a lot. I think that there's a lot left to learn about him, but that was one where I was just like, oh, that's pretty early for a player like that. What'd you think?
He had an awesome reaction to getting picked as well. Not as good as Sennecke's because he didn't drop the F-bomb, but they were sitting right behind each other, which was really cool. Yeah. And the look on his face and his dad's face was incredible. And like I said, that's what you're going to miss when they go decentralized. He played 1 year of major junior hockey last year. This was his first year in the dub. Different player, different position, but Travis Sanheim was also picked 17th overall after 1 year in the Western League and took a while to get up the curve. Washington, I grew up a Caps fan, still a Caps fan. They had a great off season. They were abysmal to watch last year despite making the playoffs. Their prospect pool is a little quirky. They haven't picked high in a really, really long time because they've been good, which is, a good problem to have. It's certainly the end of that, era there, sadly. But this guy fills it up. He scores goals, and they don't have guys that, can do that. They just re-signed McMichael. They made a couple good trades. They've got Leonard coming, maybe all the activity this offseason will convince Leonard to come out, come out early and be a part of it, which would be cool. But, certainly not, someone I saw, in their range, and, looks like a big kid can skate. That Prince George team was really good. So you wonder what's going to happen if he plays on a little bit of a weaker team. And, you don't score 40 by accident. But, a slight kid is going to need some time to, build up scale and to be able to play consistently in the NHL. But there's going to be a lot of opportunity there because they're going to lose Ovechkin, Oshie, Backstrom. All these guys are phasing out, and, it's going to be ripe with a chance to go up and get it.
Yeah, absolutely. So that, I mean, that's an interesting one. I had Prarasak as a first round pick. Maybe not that high, but still, that's really interesting. He did go ahead of Trevor Connolly, who goes to the Vegas Golden Knights. Connolly, obviously, we saw the controversy throughout the season, but Vegas doing what they often do and saying, "What can you do for us on the ice?" Yeah. What can you do for us on the ice? And I did go stop by Kelly McCrimmon's scrum at the end of the first round just to see what he had to say. And, there were obviously a lot of questions about, do you think was this the right move? And, I think that he said that, we're very comfortable with where he's at. We're comfortable with his, how he's atoned for what he's done, the work that he's put in. We don't believe that that's, going to be him. We're glad that he's going to Providence, where he's going to go to a good program and he's going to have, an opportunity to grow as a player and as a person. And, Kelly McCrimmon, although he's widely known as a major junior guy, did play college hockey himself at the University of Michigan. And so they're at least, in the end, they're all about making business decisions in Vegas, and they obviously made one with Jonathan Marchessault in free agency. They made business decision after business decision with the original Misfits. It's basically like, how do we get better? The other thing is most of their first round draft picks get traded anyway. So how will he ever even play for them? Who knows? But it was not surprising to see Trevor Connolly go at 19, and that was basically the Vegas Golden Knights saying, we know he's the best player on the board right now, and we understand the concern, but we're going to take him. And they did. Another one, Maddie, that I think surprised people that weren't paying attention to the late stages of the draft. Cole Yzerman falls to number 20, gets drafted by the New York Islanders. And what makes this pick interesting is because who else have they picked in the first round over the years? Kiefer Bellows and Oliver Wahlstrom. Two of the players that were those great NTDP goal scorers, but people were saying, I don't think it's going to translate. And thus far has not. I think, the ship probably has sailed on Kiefer Bellows. Oliver Wahlstrom is still an NHL player, but he's playing a much different role than top six scorer. Cole Yzerman goes here, based on, what you know about the player and then everything. Were you surprised? And then what do you think of this opportunity here that he's got with the Islanders?
Yeah, I mean, going into his NTDP time 2 years ago, he was billed as consensus top 3 or 4 in the birth year, right? Going in, I mean, he filled it up at Shattuck before on some loaded teams, and he's been bigger and faster and stronger than everyone for a long time. And that U17 year at the program in the USHL really changes how you play. It exposes people's flaws very quickly. These are kids, right? Playing against, grown men, up to 20 years old. It's hard, and it starts to show deficiencies. And for him, I feel like even through halfway part of the first year, because he was filling it up, you started to hear it around the U18 time that in his U17 year, hey, he's really not taking that step, and there's some deficiency here. And then kind of going into the summer last year and coming into the early part of the season, consensus faller. I didn't see anyone fall across the board, more than he did. He switched his college commitment for family reasons. He's going to go to BU instead of Minnesota. So has an opportunity to go there and develop under a great staff. He really can fill it up. And it was before you said the Bellows piece, I was thinking that in my mind because I think they drafted him 20 as well, or 19.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
all he did was shoot the puck harder than anybody else, right? It really wasn't, really wasn't billed as an NHL player. And, in any other regard than that, I think Yzerman's got more clay to work with. Lou takes his time. Who knows if Lou will still be around, when Cole's ready to play in the NHL. Their prospect pool is just kind of meh to begin with.
Yeah.
I don't really know what you think about the Islanders prospect pool. They haven't had a lot of high picks. They haven't had a lot of first-round picks in the last little while. I don't know where they went. But Cole's got a lot of tools, and he's got a lot of time to figure it out. The Islanders aren't ready to win now. And he could be an impactful piece, 3 or 4 years down the road. And, we're seeing kids stay in college a little bit longer now, and he's just going to be up to him, whether or not he's willing to put the work in to kind of get it going.
Yeah. And I will say it's a much more palatable pick at 20 than it is at 10. Right. That's the thing is that I don't want people to mistake Cole Yzerman's fall for saying that he is not an NHL prospect. Because I do think that he is. I think that he is going to score. I think he's a better player overall than both Wahlstrom and Bellows, who are the two comparables. I don't think he's at the same necessarily. Like, he's different than Cole Caulfield. The other top goal scorers, Phil Kessel, Patrick Kane. Those are the other guys that have had those big numbers. Austin Matthews. He's not those players, but he is somewhere between what the guys that he's been compared to. But I just think, the value that you get at 20 for a guy that scored 127 goals over 2 seasons is pretty darn good. So, that's the other thing. It's not that he just outscored both Bellows and Wahlstrom. He, dwarfed their numbers by a pretty significant margin. All right. So that... Go check out our pick by pick analysis on FloHockey. I've got notes on every single first round draft pick taken. It was in the moment. It was at the time the draft was happening. Talked about team fit and things like that. So go read that piece at FloHockey.tv, and hopefully if we didn't touch on guys that you wanted to hear about, you'll see more about them there. All right, now we're going to go to the winners and losers of the draft, and we're going to take this to me in the totality of the draft. And, not just the players that they picked in the first round, but who they got in the second round. Now, I will say winners and losers strongly leans towards the first round picks. Those are the ones you have to get right. But if you can get value, if you can find players that I think are, high upside players that are going to be NHL players, that's a big thing. I'm going to start this one, and then I'll kick it over to you for one. Because I know we talked a little bit off air about one of these two teams that, but the team that I have as a real winner from the draft is Montreal, because not only did they come away with Ivan Demidov, they also got Michael Hage later in the first round, and I think they got faster with Hage. He has more size, he has scoring ability. I think he fits the profile of the team that they're trying to build. Demidov's very good. I think beyond that, the rest of their draft was fine. Like, it wasn't earth shattering. I don't think they got guys that are going to be like significantly, massively improving their prospect pool. But those two guys they got at the top of the draft really do. They had the feel good story of Atos Koivu, who they selected in the third round, which I think was a very fair range for that player. I really like the pick of Logan Sawyer as well, a high upside player. He's going to Providence. He had a great season with the Brooks Bandits this year, which you were able to see throughout the year on FloHockey. And then they went and looked for more size and upside, guys like Ben Merrill out of St. Sebastian's, Mikis Vegvanegs, who I did not know about, from Latvia, a big goaltender, played for Riga this year. Tyler Thorpe, Owen Protz, Rasmus Bergqvist, they all got guys that are over 6'1". So I thought that in the end, Montreal's draft was won in the first round, but I thought they had a pretty solid day too as well. And Maddie, who do you got on your winners category?
I think it's easy to piggyback on the first round narrative at San Jose, right?
Yeah.
They really stunk last year, and it gave them the privilege to pick a really, really good franchise-changing player. But then at 11, they walked up there with a pretty full board, and Sam Dickinson is awesome from London. 6'3", big, 6'4", 200-pound left shot D. Those guys don't grow on trees, and he was over a point a game player, I think. In the OHL, both in the regular season and close to it in the playoffs. I thought that was great. And then people seem to really like the Chernyshov pick with the first pick in the second round. That fills another spot, for them. And that's a team that needs to hit it out of the park just because of where they are, organizationally. And they had a great draft last year with Will Smith and Quentin Musty in the first round. But, hard to come away with Celebrini and Dickinson and not say that they were the winner.
Yeah, and you mentioned Chernyshov. That was a guy I had in my first round. He was the best remaining player available that they ended up getting him with the first pick of the second round. Leo Solon Wallenius was a guy that I thought was a fringe first round candidate that they got with at 53. Carson Wetch was another guy on my board as a heavy forechecking forward that plays a style that helps you win in the playoffs. And then Colton Roberts was another guy on my list that they selected at 131st overall, 6'4" defenseman with some offensive upside. Just seems to be starting to scratch the surface with Vancouver. And I just think that San Jose in general, this was a big night for them. This was a big draft, and I think you and I both said it wasn't just about Celebrini. It was about what they did on day two, the number of picks that they had. Yeah,
I think Seattle also knocked it out of the park. I love that Berkeley Catton out of Spokane. I mean, he can fill it up. He scored over 50 this year in the Western League, and then in the second round they took Nathan Villeneuve from Sudbury, who I thought he fell further than I thought he would. That guy can fill it up too. He's a really, really good prospect.
He's got some toughness.
He's tough. Sudbury's tough, man. And another big center down the middle. I thought they did really well. For a group that their American League team's really good. They've got good prospects, but I think they kind of maybe overdrafted or outdrafted some of their existing prospects with their first couple picks in this draft.
Yeah, I mean, getting Catton, that's a more dynamic element than they have, and they couldn't score last year. And so they're like, hey, we need guys that can score. The one thing I will say, and I said this in my piece too, very light on D in their system. Very, very light, like abnormally light. And it's honestly, I think, going to be a problem someday. They did go out and sign Brandon Montour to a long-term contract on free agency day, so that helps. Riker Evans, who's in their system, is a good young player who's done very well in the AHL. But at some point, you have to start drafting defensemen. They just have not drafted many defensemen that I think are going to play in the NHL. And so that's the thing where I couldn't give him my highest grade because of that. But Berkeley Catton was 5th on my board. They take him 8th. I thought for sure they were taking a defenseman, and then they take Catton, and I think that was fine. Yeah, I did too. And that's the other thing. And the only other thing, like the Sharks, the only thing I didn't like is I would have taken Buium over Dickinson. But to your point, what you raised earlier is, can you have a number one defenseman at his size? Is it gonna? It's gonna be interesting to kind of find out how that works out. Now, I will say the Colorado Avalanche had a number one defenseman that was an inch shorter than Zeev Buium, and they did win a Stanley Cup. So we'll see where that goes. But you know who Cale Makar is, right?
I've heard of Cale. I've heard of him. He's all right.
Just teasing. Yeah. So let's look at some of the losers, and basically when you lose a draft, it's usually because you don't have picks. You're not able to make an impact. And I think, a team that I felt didn't make any impact at all on a number of fronts is the Winnipeg Jets. And, you and I have both obviously are very high on Rutger McGroarty. They now have to trade that player. They weren't able to get a high enough draft pick to move him at the draft. I had basically said that on the podcast the week before. I said, if you think they're going to get fair value on the draft, at the draft this year, you're joking, because the top 14 players, I think, were more highly regarded than the top 14 players when he was picked 14th overall. And as we saw, there wasn't going to be a way to get in there. So they don't make that trade. Their picks were, they only had a few picks, so I don't want to beat them up too much, because it's really hard to have a good draft when you don't have very many picks. They had 4. Their first was 37th overall. They took Alphonse Frey, who's an offensive defenseman, but I have some significant hockey sense concerns about him. He's a guy that kind of started higher on my board, started moving back. Kevin He, very highly regarded in terms of his offensive game, but doesn't necessarily have like that jam. He just did not seem like the kind of player that Winnipeg often drafts, especially in the mid rounds. It seemed a little bit off brand. Markus Lopinen was picked in the 5th round, a bigger center out of Finland. I thought, he's a fine player, not real flashy, doesn't do a ton offensively. And then Kieran Walton was their last pick in 87th overall. I mean, I think really the story of Winnipeg's offseason now is coming down to what happens with Rutger McGroarty here.
Yeah, and that's a really tough situation. I know we've talked on this podcast before about my affinity for the player. Big fan of Rutger, and I know he was, maybe a little bit less regarded in the eyes of the publics going into his draft year. And I know that there was an overture to try and get him there after their season at Michigan. And, it's well known in the circles that Winnipeg prefers American League development time to another year of wherever you are, college or, pick a spot. And if I'm the kid in the era of NIL, would I rather go back to Ann Arbor, Michigan and kind of be the man for a 3rd year on a really good team, and still get, a little bit of dough, or go play for the Manitoba Moose and ride the bus? It's not a difficult decision for me, right? As in that chair. I know they tried. I think it got a little untenable. I don't know if they've made a formal trade request to Winnipeg, but it's not going to end well. And again, just another crappy situation for a small market team that, is never going to be a high-end free agent destination. And you wonder now how that plays into their draft board psychology. But yeah. It's hard to get out of the park when you don't have a lot of picks. I remember one year, I think St. Louis had 2 picks when they were kind of building their team, and you work all year and you sit around for 2 days to, take 2 picks. I thought Utah had a really, really weird draft. They had a ton of picks. I didn't like their suits at all. Usually they show up with a little bit of flash. I thought they looked terrible this year, really cheap. But they only took defensemen and centers. If you go pull up the board and look at it in one spot. I love Tidja Ginla, the way he plays. His motor's awesome. Might have been a little bit of a reach at 6, but, who knows? Really good player. I didn't love the Skahan pick as high as he went. I think they're maybe enamored with size. I mean, these guys are they want big dudes, right? They want big dudes, big bodies that are going to be hard to play against. And you have to have other elements to that, right? Now, they've got a brand new owner, big pockets. They're going to spend whatever it takes to be relevant. And so maybe they go out and they go and try and trade for a Mitch Marner, and get rid of some of their younger pieces, going back. But you only have 50 contracts. These guys have had a ton of picks the last 2 or 3 years. I'm surprised that they made as many as they did, versus trying to trade them away for future years or trade them away for roster players. Now, they did make the splash of the draft. I don't think anybody saw the Mikhail Sergachev trade coming. That was out of left field. And we'll talk about that later, maybe with free agency stuff. But that was kind of out of nowhere, right? And then it was out there again. They had the second trade that went really quickly back to back, and it was kind of buzzing around my phone from some guys that it might have been Chychrun from Ottawa, but instead they made the trade with New Jersey, and it was weird to see New Jersey give up on Alexander Holtz so quickly, as well. But I think that Utah kind of came in there and just picked a bunch of big dudes and a bunch of centers. It's just different for me.
Yeah. So. Well, I think Ginla will probably end up being wing long term. I think that he's listed as a center, but I do think he'll be a wing long term. And I think the Sergachev thing, when they didn't take Zeev Buium at 6th, even though they are a size loving team, because like Tej he's 6 foot, but he's not, he's not huge.
Plays hard though.
He plays hard, and it made a lot of sense when they're like, oh, but we have Mikhail Sergachev, and now we've got John Marino, and now we've got now we've got a top 4, and they did extend Sean Durzi, and like there's all these different things that they did that now make their draft make a little more sense. The thing is, like, they also trading Connor Geekie So they do trade away one of their center prospects. I thought that was a really solid deal, to get Sergachev coming back. JJ Moser, who they also traded, I really like that player as well. That was a mid-round draft pick that they hit a home run with a couple of years ago. But I mean, I didn't mind their draft so much, but I think that, it's going to be interesting to see like how high end that group is going to be. Cole Beaudoin is a two-way kind of gritty, physical guy. Skahan's no offense, all physicality. So there's certainly some things there, but they end up getting I think 6 or 7 guys off of my top 100. So I can't beat them up too much for that. So, but yeah, I think that's good.
Cole Beaudoin also wins best dressed. That 3-piece light blue number was breathtaking.
Yeah. See, that's the other thing that's the other reason I had Maddie on here is he is here for the fashion. So fashion forward. So he makes up for the scout staff, I guess, with that. All right. Before we move on to free agency, I want to just very quickly go over to some NHL draft facts and figures. And Maddie, I'll take it from here on this one, and I'll let you catch your breath, because this one is what something that it's some shameless self promotion, not for me but for FloHockey. And this year, I went back and counted. There were 54 players that played at least one game on FloHockey this year that were selected in the NHL Draft. 25 full-time USHL players, 13 from the National Team Development Program, which you can also fold into that USHL number. That would be on top of the 25 full-timers. A number of high school players like Dean Letourneau and Hagen Burroughs that played also in the USHL. We had 4 from the BCHL selected in this draft. I mentioned Logan Sawyer a bit earlier, who was a big hit at the media scrum after he was drafted, played for the Brooks Bandits. 5 players from the NCAA that had games on FloHockey last year, including Chase Pietola, who played all season with the Michigan Tech Huskies. And then we also had Macklin Celebrini's first NCAA goal that he scored against Bentley. We also had 4 games of Artem Levshinov, and then also 2 OJHL players selected in the draft. So there is a great opportunity for you. This is a shameless plug. If you have not yet, sign up for FloHockey, because it is a place where you're going to see the stars of tomorrow. And there is more on the way. We're going to have more hockey. We're going to continue to build what we've got here. But looking, to watch an entire USHL season and to see, you could have watched Macklin Celebrini all of last year. You could have watched Artem Levshinov all of last year. You could have seen it all happen on this platform. And boy, is it so fun for me to be able to watch these players regularly, obviously go interview them, talk to them. But FloHockey, 52 or 54 players drafted from the FloHockey platform. So obviously you guys got to watch it. You gotta watch it. Maddie watches it, right? Maddie, you got to
watch it, man. You guys have done. The content's great. It's fun to watch the player interviews and all that good stuff. 54 players is significantly more. We got to talk about this. No players from the Quebec League drafted in the first round.
Yeah. It's there were 2. No people from no players from the Quebec League. No Swedes drafted in the first round. That was crazy. 2 Norwegians selected in the first round, 0 Swedes. So that was wild. Also, just seeing the number of players and the fact we knew coming into this year it was going to be a great year for the USHL at the draft. And I think it even exceeded our expectations with, top 2 guys being alumni from the league, a number of import players. Matt Gridden from the Muskegon Lumberjacks had 2 first-round draft picks. Their 2 first-round draft picks in franchise history. Dubuque Fighting Saints saw, I think, 6 players drafted from their roster as well. Many of them later, but it was just like guys like, Noah Powell, who had just an explosive goal-scoring season. The Univaisinen, who was one of my favorite players in the draft as a sleeper. I liked him so much that I put him in my top 100. And Max Swanson, the USHL Player of the Year, did become a 7th-round draft pick, a smaller player, but he ends up going. So lots of great stuff on FloHockey. Make sure you are signed up. We will be back, next season, bigger and better, with lots more hockey to come. So really looking forward to that. All right, Maddie, you are somebody who knows things and knows people. And so we chat a lot of NHL stuff because in addition to being a scout, you're a friend to many, which I think is a good thing. And so we've got NHL free agency, and I want to touch on it quickly. Obviously we don't spend a ton of time on the NHL on this podcast, but I think that it obviously is a massive day, and we're just one day removed from the opening of free agency. What were some of your big takeaways? What were the things that were just, surprised you the most, or maybe some of the things that opened your eyes a little bit?
Yeah, it was a fun and wild day yesterday, especially right off the heels of Vegas. Just the schedule this year was a bit of a cluster. With the cup being awarded so late and everybody having to run around. And it was the same for my couch, which was great. I've got a good couch where I can just sit back and talk a bunch of trash in a bunch of group chats and try and break some news. And I thought it was cool this year. You hear it a lot, general managers come out of the trade deadline and stuff, and they say, oh, it's really hard to make trades. It's really hard to move money and contracts and stuff like that. And I think, this year for the first time in a while because of COVID, there's finally some relief in the system, and there's some flexibility to play with. And it was really apparent, kind of who approached both the draft and free agency with a plan and went in and went after who they wanted to go after with vigor, and they got them, right? I mean, Nashville is clearly the day one winner, coming out of, yesterday with Steven Stamkos and Brady Shea and the rest of the crew that they walked in there. Crazy how Tampa Bay just lets maybe the most important and influential player in franchise history, 16 years, first overall pick, 2 Stanley Cups, took discounts every contract period to stay. And they made him a 8-year, $3.5 million offer, pathetic, to let him walk away. And, Stammer was, all class on the radio yesterday saying, hey, I was surprised too. We wanted to do everything we could to make it work. But, kudos to Barry Trotz, who went in there, last year with a plan and, to pull off Marchessault at the last minute from New Jersey and Stamkos and Shea. I mean, are they an immediate contender in the West for next year? They got to be, right? They have to be. Signing UC Saros to the long-term deal as well. They went in and knocked it out. It's fun to watch. And then Tampa turns right around after dishing, their number 2 defenseman, and they bring in the most sought after free agent on a max deal, almost a max deal, in Jake Gensel. And so, it was a pretty wild, kind of hard to believe, but I think I read there was over $1 billion of contract value signed yesterday, right? Ching. And, there's a lot of, I think there's still a lot of moves yet to be made. I think, these managers, when they address the media, they say a lot by not saying much. Mum was the word coming out of Toronto yesterday. They've got big decisions to make with Tavares and Mitch Marner and what's going to go on there. There were a couple other interesting press conferences around. I mean, it's amazing to me. Carolina just doesn't play ball. They're letting guys walk for almost nothing. And I like the Ghost signing a lot. He's a good guy. And, Sean Walker, comes in on a 5-year deal. I don't know if Carolina got better yesterday. They were a team that a lot of people thought had a chance to, really make a run to win the Eastern Conference this year, lost in the second round again. I just don't know, right? It's tough what's going to happen with Natchez there. And, but like I said before, now that there's more money in the system, teams can take swings. And then, you look at some of the other teams that are maybe going in the wrong direction. Pittsburgh's trying to get younger and faster, and they signed my good buddy Kevin Hayes, who's older and not faster, or they trade for him at the draft and all that stuff. Columbus bringing back Sean Monahan, or bringing in Sean Monahan. Why, right? Like, what does that accomplish on a 5-year deal? And you're seeing now how hard some of these big deals are to move. Look at Trouba in New York. Hey, I'm not going to waive my no move. My wife, medical school, blah blah blah. People earn that, but it's hard to move pieces around the chessboard. So it was fun to watch yesterday. It was fast and furious. But I think Nashville comes away, the big winner. Immediately making their team better.
Yeah, they are better. It's going to be interesting to see how some of those contracts age. But I mean, the fact that they went in and got Stanley Cup, Conn Smythe guys, it's nuts. And then also to have Saros, and then they still have a big piece that they can trade in Yaroslav Askarov as well. The top goalie prospect. I mean,
they were also
it sounds
signed.
like
Those deals were signed. Those deals were signed before these guys were 35, so they're movable or buryable, I would say.
Yeah.
Although I did hear from an insider type that the NHL is now like eyes wide open on some of these big time. Like if Stamkos signed the $3 million deal for 8 years in Tampa, and I'm Bill Daly or Gary Bettman, it's like LOL, dude. Are you kidding me? You're not going to be playing the last 3 or 4 years of your deal for $3 million bucks at 840. Just no effing way. So it's interesting to see how guys kind of move it around, and the eternal debate of no tax states versus signing in Canada. I mean, the Sam Reinhart deal was amazing, 8.65 or whatever it was for a guy that huge piece for them winning the Stanley Cup, signs for below market value. Pretty cool.
Yeah, there was a lot of interesting moves. Seattle opened up the wallet a little bit too with Brandon Montour and Chandler Stevenson. I mean, the Stevenson deal was pretty aggressive. I like Chandler Stevenson. I know you do too, but that was a lot of years and a lot of money.
A lot of years and a lot of money, right? And I think there's like I said before, Washington maybe brought themselves back from the abyss for at least a little bit with trading for PLD, who's definitely controversial, but then going out and getting, Matthew Roy from LA, right? And I think he chose to go there. And would that indicate that, hey, maybe what you hear about Dubois is not all maybe right? He's really, truly a bad guy and a bad teammate who doesn't really care. Am I going to go sign a 5-year deal to go play with him across the country? I don't know.
Yeah, that's a very fair point. Very fair point as well. And I think that there's a lot left to be figured out. I mean, I could not believe how fast and furious everything moved on free agency, and it's going to make for a very lengthy summer, or not long enough, I guess, because I could use a break, and it's not coming.
How about Edmonton? How about Edmonton too, with no general manager, 4 days off of losing a 7-game series in heartbreaking fashion, and Jeff Jackson, who's like one of the best guys of all time, became friendly with him when he was an agent. He comes out and says, I don't really want this. We're going to find a real full-time GM, and we're probably not going to do much in free agency. And he signs 12 players. So they were wheeling and dealing, and some good ones, right? They were slinging it around yesterday. Which was fun.
Good to see Jeff Skinner get another kick at the can.
Well, now his playoff streak's going to end.
Let's hope so. Although who knows? You never know. Edmonton is they go from the Game 7 of the Stanley Cup Final, and we saw how they started their season. You just never really know. Maddie, I just want to say thanks a lot, bud. You always sling it around. You keep it honest. You keep it real. You bring the jocularity to the table. And actually, like one of the comments for the last time you were on, I think we got a 5-star rating simply because you were on. They said we need more Matty Mo, and so I delivered way later than I wanted to. But thank you, my friend, for joining us on the pod this week. It's been a lot of fun.
No, it's always fun to come here and chop it up, and appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, man. Well, we appreciate the insight. We appreciate you hanging with us, because we're gonna take a little break. We're gonna go ahead and take some time off from the pod, just a couple of weeks, and then we'll be back in a few weeks here to get ready for the World Junior Summer Showcase. Canada back in the mix. We've got Team USA getting ready. They've got their list, and Sweden and Finland will also be there. FloHockey will be there to provide coverage. You will definitely want to keep up with that as we get ready for next year's World Junior Championship, which of course we cover pretty comprehensively as well. So, just want to very quickly say thank you to Nikki for producing today's episode. Huge thanks to Matty Mo for joining us. Thanks to everybody that has been listening this year, and also anybody that checked out our draft coverage. I just want to let you guys know you were part of a record-setting draft season for us on FloHockey. Great numbers. We saw a lot of people coming through the website. We hope that you enjoyed it. We hope that you found it informative. We saw our YouTube page really explode as well. Our social medias are starting to grow. Make sure you're following us on social media at FloHockey on pretty much all of them. TikTok at FloHockey TV. We've got lots of stuff from the draft, and we even have more to come. We left plenty on the cutting room floor that we'll continue to distribute throughout the rest of the summer as we get ready. But we're going to take a little siesta. We're going to go ahead and shut it down for a little bit. We've had a lot of draft coverage this year. I'm ready for a nap, as you probably can tell by watching this podcast, that I look a little bit heavy under the eyes. And let me tell you, I'm not trying to hide it, because that is exactly how I feel. But it has been an absolutely incredible season. So thankful to everyone that stopped by this year to listen to the podcast or watch it on YouTube or on FloHockey.tv or on the Flow Sports app. We really do appreciate our listeners and want to thank you all for joining us throughout this entire season. Hey, we're going to be back. We're going to be bigger and better next season. We're going to try to take this time off to make sure that we're getting ready for a much bigger 2024-25. But that is going to do it for the final episode of the 2023-24 NHL season and NHL draft season and all the seasons that we had on FloHockey. We will be back in just a few weeks to get you ready for 2024-25. That's going to do it for today's episode of Talking Hockey Sense. My name is Chris Peters. We'll catch you next time.